I'm going to be welcoming to the stage Dr. Suba, who is going to talk to us not just about well-being, but about well-being truly sustainable and into the future. So strategies for sustainable well-being. Suba.
Thank you, Jenny. And good afternoon, everyone. So I've only got 25 minutes, of which 5 minutes is for questions, so I'm going to whiz straight through. So my name is Suba. I'm the Medical and Sustainability Director at Aviva, and I really wanted to share some insights with you today about balancing the urgency of meeting the financial plan and keeping the business afloat against the longevity of building a culture that creates value for customers and shareholders. So my approach to this particular question is heavily influenced by my background. So I've spent my career in several sectors, so healthcare, surgery, academia, retail health, and insurance. So hopefully I can share some concepts and examples, not to tell you what to do, because you all know what to do, and there's lots of people in this Congress who can tell you what to do, but really to provoke your thinking and challenge all of us to be expansive and be deliberate in what we choose to do next. So I have got a Slido poll, so if you go to the room and answer the question that we've got for you. So which of the following is your organisation's biggest barrier to delivering sustainable wellbeing outcomes? And then we'll come back to this at the end of my talk. So maybe at that point you can decide which of these is the hardest thing, and we can drill down a little bit down to that. So let me start by making a case for why we actually need to think about this. Why do we need to solve this issue? So I'm going to make an assumption that because you're actually here, you're staying till 3 o'clock, that you know that there is an issue. But for those of you in the room who need a bit more convincing, these data points might sway you. So I know Debbie mentioned earlier this morning about the Keep Britain Working review, which has been headed by Sir Charlie Mayfield, and it actually identified the loss of productive capacity for employers and economy to be equivalent to £150 billion in the UK. And that is a really significant amount of money that's actually just being left on the table. And it's all on all of us here in this room to try and fix that. If you're not motivated by money, maybe I can convince you in terms of the human cost. So 8.7 million people in the UK working age population have a long-term health condition that limits the type and amount of work that they can do. Look, this is a big number, but my biggest concern about this number is not just the scale of it, but the fact that nearly 1 in 4 people out of work due to ill health are under the age of 35. So this is an issue that is likely to span several decades in the future. So the other thing, if numbers about other people are not your thing, maybe I can try and compel you to act by considering the fact that we are likely to spend 80,000 hours at work over our 45 years of life spent at work. And if you listen to Professor Hannah Fry earlier this morning, this particular number of years could be more. I don't know about you, but for purely selfish reasons, I am certainly motivated to make sure that work works for me, not just right now, but for my and our collective future. So hopefully I've set out the stall in terms of the scale of the challenge. But before I share some strategies on how I think we could tackle some of this, I thought it might be interesting to just take a step back, right, and explore why are we even having this debate. We know the solutions. The range of specialists outside in this conference are testament to that. So what is really holding us back? So I have a hypothesis. I'm going slightly, left-wing on this. Bear with me. I read a really interesting theory by positive psychologist Martin Seligman. He wrote a book in 2016, and his team of researchers made a case that our species is misnamed. So we're called Homo sapiens, and that translates to wise man. But according to Seligman, what sets us apart from other animals is our ability to forecast, to really contemplate our future. And this ability is what created civilization and sustains society. And it is this ability to anticipate and evaluate future possibilities that has led us to human success. But I know that some of you right now are probably thinking about what train to catch back home, or what to drink to have at the reception later on after this event. But it's not the short-term planning that I'm referring to that really sets us apart. It is the longer-term imagination of possibilities that really gives us a competitive advantage to create new worlds for ourselves. And I think if you cast your mind back to earlier when Professor Hannah Fry was talking about that thin line that differentiates between biological and digital organisms, this might be what it is. For now, anyway. So while we are capable of prospecting, when it comes to moments of crisis, it is also within our biology to adopt a fight, flight, or freeze response. So we shut down our thinking about the future and sharpen our focus on survival. So I can imagine the conversations that are happening in boardrooms. Some of you might be part of it. I certainly have been, where you're looking at year-on-year cost increasing and growth is lagging, and you're more likely to be making decisions on survival mode and not necessarily leaning into our biological imperative to be Homo prospectus. So the challenge for us is not to yield to the siren's call of focusing on the short term. So I've just talked to you about, our individual behaviour and that instinct, but I'm going to shift our focus to how we show up and interact with others, something that we're kind of forced to do in our workplace, whether you like it or not. So for those of you who are familiar with Adam Grant, the organisational psychologist, you might recall he wrote a book called Give and Take. And in his research, he talks about, he puts forward the concept that most people operate in 3 modes. So either takers, matchers, or givers. So it's literally what it says on the tin. So takers try and take as much from other people as possible to advantage themselves. Matchers kind of like trade evenly, and givers contribute more to others. And, because we're businesses and we're serious about our performance, if you track these preferences to performance, it is really surprising to learn that givers, who not only exhibit high concern for others, but also those who manage their own interest, were the highest performing, followed by matchers and then takers, and actually quite surprisingly, the worst performers were also givers, the ones who were giving in a more self-sacrificial manner. So why does this matter? So I think in a world that is becoming increasingly transactional, I think it's really important for us to understand how people show up. And actually what's been interesting in this book is that the first move to be a giver is what sets the tone. So I think as organizations, I know people want more and maybe can move into a transactional relationship, but it's organizations that start first and say, let's be the givers, let's be people who kind of put high concern for others. The other interesting thing is that when we commodify an entity, be it time or achievement, it tends to have unintended consequences by devaluing that relationship. So a great example is this study that I really quite like. It was done in a nursery in 2000, and the nursery implemented fines for parents who are picking up their kids late. So you'd think that it would act as a deterrent and fewer parents would, kind of pick up their children late. But actually, having a fine, by commodifying it, that actually created a transactional agreement. So people actually preferred paying for the lateness rather than feeling obliged to turn up on time to allow for the nursery worker to go back home for the day. So it really did make me stop and think that, how we design incentives and penalties at work really promote high-performance health matters. So creating well-being propositions that feel like a tick box exercise that is very focused on the short-term horizon actually perpetuates the transactional workplace culture where individuals can actually start watching the clock rather than think about how do you build a better future. So why not be transactional, right? Workplace is only there for a task to be done. The individual gets a salary for getting the task done. But actually, workplace health and well-being is not something that can be achieved through taking or matching. Culture, and we know that from lots of different studies, is a precondition for building any well-being strategy. In a perma-crisis world that is forcing us to respond in short, reactive timeframes, making the case for longer-term decisions can be tricky. But this is what the science says. So researchers from Oxford University looked at the relationship between workplace well-being and business performance and found that this is a study of 1,782 companies. They looked at employee-level well-being measures and also business performance, and well-being was positively associated with profitability and value. And I can certainly attest to that with Aviva's own data. So we had sickness absence of 3.9% in 2022, which went down to 2.4% in end of 2024. So we were buckling the sickness absence trend. And that's on the back of 18 consecutive quarters of strong business growth. So really, this is not really a trade-off. And a focus on delivering high-quality work environment and health solutions is actually table stakes. We've heard from several speakers earlier today that that is an expectation, and there is a business need for this as well. So that's all fine, but how do you actually kind of navigate through this? So this brings me to the concept. This actually was introduced to me by a mentor, this concept of organisational ambidexterity. So we live in times of paradox, right? I don't know how many of you have watched the Barbie movie, but if you remember the monologue that they say in the Barbie movie, so you have to do so many different things. You have to move fast, but don't break things. You have to take ownership and have accountability and deliver, but also seek consensus and bring everybody along. And I can go on, but we have a number of contradictory directives that we have to navigate through in our daily life. So we need to keep the existing business viable, but also grow through innovation. And this all seems logically impossible and very strained on the poor people who are in the middle of all of this. Successful organizations have managed to master this to ensure that they live to see another technological advance. So this term, organisational ambidexterity, it was actually coined in 1996, which to demonstrate that companies are able to do both tactical exploitation and strategic exploration. And something that resonated with me about, how to talk about it was a quote by Steve Blank. He said, "Exploitation pays your salary, while exploration pays your pension. Companies that survive do both." So there are different ways in which you can do this, and this is, what they were looking at in terms of innovation. But the recommended way is to have innovation embedded in each part of the organization. So it's not seen as, a responsibility of another single department or something that's viewed as a handover, but more of a dynamic process where everyone steps in together to innovate. So when I was thinking about the challenges that's facing us in this sector, where money is tight and cost containment seems to be the driving force, this concept of being able to think in two different time horizons, I think, might be the key that unlocks success. So I've talked a little bit about, how we think and, how perhaps we can position ourselves. But I now want to move on to the how. So one thing we are all massive fans of is ourselves, right? So any email that is personalized to you, that has your name, is more likely to grab your attention and then in turn get you to act on something than a generic one. The same principle applies in the workplace. And I just want to share an example of something that's been done well by the NHS. So this is an example of a shared decision-making tool for anyone experiencing hip pain due to osteoarthritis. So what I liked about it is that not only does it start with anchoring for this person to ask them how are they feeling, it gives them a list of treatment options, but then also draws them back to what really matters to that individual. And then it uses data visualization to help you make a decision on what statistics are with you regarding to getting pain relief and then potential side effects of that treatment. So you can really make an informed decision about what treatment option you ought to explore. So that's a kind of personalization in action. But actually, this is not new. And the world that we live in now is already hyper-personalized. So my question to you is, where does your workplace well-being offer sit on the spectrum of being reactive, where it is one size fits all, but to one that is perhaps more hyper-personalized and far more predictive? While I'm a fan of personalization, the reason I'm highlighting this is because we're living in times of intersectionality and multi-generational workforce. And generations do matter. I know we kind of split people based on their demographic, but the interesting thing about demographics and generations is that within each generation, you have different formative experiences, cultural set points, what matters to individuals, what their social norms are, and their attitudes in the workplace, and they all vary significantly. So where someone like my dad, who is still working at the age of 75, he doesn't seem to understand the concept of retirement, he is fiercely loyal to his employer. My peers, millennials, are all about working with the organization and not for the organization. So this really changes the social contract between employer and employee. And that is really creating a more transactional workplace, especially more so in the younger generation. But I would warn you against being too simplistic about blaming a certain generation or making any assumptions. There is definitely more nuance to this. So again, we've got the increase in gig economy, the kind of promotion of side hustles, and just the difficulty of achieving home ownership compared to previous generations. So all that adds into what people expect from the workplace and what really engages them from a personalization perspective. So really, when it comes to the workplace, our responsibility is to meet people where they are and forecast how to shift the current transactional bias to a more transformational relationship. And that really starts with asking for people what they actually want. So Aviva's got a working life report, which was published last year, and we looked at various different things. But something that stood out to me was the fact that employers have actually introduced more support for cohorts of employees, such as those who need fertility support, menopause support, and also LGBTQ plus employees. But while this is applaudable, because obviously employers are listening to what employees want and providing them with that, what really caught my eye was if you overlap it with the Keep Britain Working review on the population health needs, you can see that young workers with multiple health conditions are more likely to leave the workforce, as is anyone with a mental health condition. And I think this is, you've heard this from many other speakers today. So true personalisation is really about taking these different data points, understanding how individuals behave in the workplace, and then tailoring the benefit for those individuals who are at highest risk. So the days and the kind of benefits of just giving out free fruit and activity trackers without the human connection are no longer fit for purpose in a world that requires us to be prudent with our resources. So one of my favorite lines is from John Doerr, who wrote the book Measure What Matters. Ideas are easy, execution is everything. So there's no point in these congresses. The food is lovely, by the way, and you people are lovely to chat with. But if all we do is to turn up and listen to ideas, but fail to put them into action. So I just want to share with you, a sketch of a blueprint of how to organize your thoughts in a step-by-step plan. This is only a rough guide and, a little bit about what we did at Aviva to deliver on our people promise. First really is the business case. So, speak the business language, prime your data set, make sure you can demonstrate ROI. I saw some of the pain points that people were talking about earlier in terms of ROI. Something we did was really count out the outcomes you cannot, demonstrate within the time frame of the next round of funding. So you're not going to be able to prove that you've reduced diabetes prevalence in a year, but you can monitor sickness absence and employee sentiment. The other thing I would say is data quality is a pain, but you just have to do it. We had to tidy up our absence reasons category on our platform as a starting point of a no regrets action. There's no way you're going to get funding on ROI if your data is askew. The next step is really hard when you don't have embedded nature of workplace. So I would say be a scientist, learn from evidence, invest wisely based on what has been proven to work. So get the cultural architects on board to make these initiatives successful. You know who they are in your organizations. If you do not know, go and learn who they are. One downside of getting everyone involved, however, warning, is that everyone has an opinion on what works for them. So beware pandering to the louder, more articulate individual when actually your duty is to serve everyone in an inclusive manner. The other thing, as a scientist, I would say measure, 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 and do not be afraid to kill pet projects if it's not yielding business benefits. Sometimes doing and having activity can feel comforting, but feelings are not facts, so be really ruthless in your ambition to deliver value. Lastly, you need to tell the story, celebrate your wins, create your library of plans, because you never know when you can need to revisit a project that was shelved because it was ahead of its time, or that the cohort of employees that you've got have actually shifted in their health needs. So nothing's really wasted when you're actually learning. So I think I've spoken really quite quickly, but I have about 1.5 minutes to conclude the rest of this before going to questions. So I've shared with you the case for action, our USP as humans, how we interact with each other, our preferences, the need for personalization, and a blueprint for action. I just want to wrap this up by calling upon the works of a philosopher and ethicist, William MacAskill. In his book, What We Owe the Future, he puts forward the idea that we live in a critical juncture. Amazing pigeons who are kind of able to tell apart from malignant and benign breast cancer slides. And this is a result of rapid technology and social and environmental change. But we're also in a position to positively influence in future more than any other generation has ever had the opportunity to do so. So for this reason, I think we need to shift from awareness to action. Look, we all know the numbers, right? 10,000 steps, 5 a day, 3 liters of water, but knowing is not doing. Most of us probably don't do that. So we need to cultivate a bias towards action if we are to see the outcome. So plans are all great, but if it's not pitched to the right person at the right time, having a benefit is ineffective because it will not be accessed and the outcome will not be achieved. So personalize with intention if you want to see the benefit being used. We are all individuals and we have multiple layers to us. So do not assume you can make decisions on behalf of others. Bring them along, co-produce policies, and move away from a world where a rich benefit list is how you compete. And the reason we are here talking about cost containment and margin is because of the fact that we've been having a short-term view, thinking more is more. Embrace an attitude of just enough. We need to cater for variation if it's to personalize the service, but look out for unwarranted variation. So it should be variation for the service user, not variation based on suppliers. Lastly, our work is never done because there is always a fine balance between peace and progress, but it is in our DNA to survive and thrive, so we need to improve and innovate. If I could leave you with a challenge, all I'm going to say is give yourself time to digest what you've heard today, reflect and act. I personally was inspired by the youth ambassador to UN, who spoke to some of the senior leaders at Aviva. So no matter what you think of yourselves in this room, in terms of your power and influence, the fact that you're here means you have a level of autonomy and authority that is unheard of and unimaginable to several millions of people in the world. So it is really our moral imperative to use our power to advocate and build a positive future. So let's embrace the paradoxes, be cautiously optimistic, morally ambitious, content never satisfied. Thank you.
Thanks, Suba. There's a lot to think about there.
There is. There's a lot you need to do after this. That is what I'm going to say.
Indeed. Yes. And let's focus on that to take it to practical toolkits, because I think a lot of what you talked about there is actually a culture shift within an organisation and a way of thinking. And you did reference around embedding innovation in all areas. But where can organisations start to do that? Is it something led from the top, or how do you encourage that to happen?
I think it kind of... Well, I'm going to say everywhere. So it has to come from the top. So one of the things is it has to be in your performance metric. You have to set the tone from the top from board members. But equally, you need to make sure that it is cognizant of the people in the front line doing, their day jobs. There's no point in having something that's imperative from the top if you can't get people on the ground to engage. But that's where the cultural architects come in. Find out who those people are who know where the gossip is, right? Like, follow the gossip is what I would say.
Okay.
And get those people to spread the message. I only say that because that's been seen to work in public health message spreading.
That's interesting.
So
it's like thought leaders inside the business.
Exactly that. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. And then another question. There is a difference, isn't there, between what employees want, or what might be, dare I say, the latest or fad or fashionable benefit, versus what the data is truly telling you is needed. Yeah. How do you balance those? Because obviously, if people are championing something or it's important to them in the way that you highlighted is such a key aspect, but actually the overall needs of the workforce don't reflect that very niche need. How do you balance all of that off?
So I think data is really helpful there. So actually knowing what the composition of your people there. I know people are naturally selfish, but when you show people this is who is part of your business, this is where the needs are, and this is how much is actually helping individuals, I think people tend to understand. But I think that's where you can use the Flex Benefits platform, for example, where you can add in those niche, in-depth kind of benefits. You're not everybody's going to use it, but you're not also disadvantaging anyone else because you're not kind of, stopping them from accessing it. The personalised health and wellbeing budgets, for example, is something that we're trialling out that's been quite interesting. Okay,
so giving the choice to the employee themselves so that they can put the power in their own hands, if you like.
If that's what they want.
Yeah. And I guess what goes with that is explaining very clearly to employees what each thing is and why they might be choosing it.
Yeah. But then again, when you are giving them the ability to choose, that gives you another source of data and insight. So when we did a pilot, we found that more people were picking brain health as one of the things that they wanted to invest in. Not something that we would have ever thought of.
Very interesting. Thank you. Well, I don't think there's any more questions at the moment, so thank you so much, Suba.
Perfect.
Please show your appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you.